In the late autumn of 1924, the young Heisenberg was hiking in the mountains around Lake Aachen in Austria with some friends. The mountains were veiled in a thick cover of clouds. During their climb, the mists from the clouds enveloped them so thoroughly that they couldn't see where they were going and lost sight of the trail. Eventually, they also lost sight of each other, until for a brief moment they spied the edge of a steep rock face, bathed in sunlight, and thus they were able to gain their bearings and finish the climb, ascending above the clouds to behold the mountain peaks of Sunwen Mountains, and beyond them the snow-capped Alps. Heisenberg would later go on to become one of the greatest physicists of the 20th century. For Heisenberg, this experience would serve as an allegory for the struggles to discern the nature of the mechanics or physics of the subatomic matter and light. His ascent through the intellectual clouds which surrounded the physics community, trying to make sense of the behavior of this subatomic world, occurred only a year later, in May of 1925. Now, only he was alone mountain climbing through the North Sea island of Helgoland. He had taken leave of absence to escape a terrible attack of hay fever, which had left his face so swollen that the landlady assumed he had been in a fight. He was struggling to understand how to calculate these spectral lines of hydrogen in a consistent way. Between thinking, climbing, and memorizing Goethe's poems in West Eastern Divan, he hardly slept, so consumed he was by this process. It was during the midst of this that Heisenberg invented modern quantum mechanics. Interestingly, it might be said that the first hint of idealism in the natural world was born in the poems of Goethe's West Eastern Divan. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe was a German writer, poet, statesman, and naturalist. His work, West Eastern Divan, was an ode to the great Persian poet Hafez and Islamic Persian mysticism. Perhaps these poems were like the illuminated rock face, which permitted the young Heisenberg to make his bearings so that he could take his ascent through the clouds which obscured the sun of truth. Heisenberg would later, in his book Physics and Beyond, write, "At first I was deeply alarmed. I had the feeling that through the surface of atomic phenomenon, I was looking at a strangely beautiful interior, and felt almost giddy at the thought that now I had to probe this wealth of mathematical structures nature had so generously spread out before me. I was far too excited to sleep, and so as the new day dawned, I made for the southern tip of the island, where I had been longing to climb a rock jutting out into the sea. I now did so without much trouble and waited for the sun to rise." His epiphany came when he realized that his problems could be solved by assuming that the momentum and position were bound up in such a way that the order of their observation mattered. Thus, how one observed the physical world actually mattered in a real way and could produce very different and opposite results. The existence of a mind-independent, objective reality suddenly was not so clear. Heisenberg himself would go on to become a convinced Platonist, describing elementary particles as comparable to the regular bodies of Plato's Timaeus. They are the original models, the ideas of matter.